Okay, I will call this meeting of the Salt Lake City Human Rights Commission to order. It's Tuesday, April 4th, 2023 at 5:35 p.m. We're going to do roll call. So I am Jason Wessel, Chair representing District 1, and I am present. Let's go with David.
I'm David Lita, representing District 6.
Will.
Will, representing District 4.
Okay, and then Pamela.
Pamela Silberman. Will and I have this confusion. I also thought I was representing District 4, but maybe I'm at large. I'm not sure.
One of you is at large.
Yeah, you're an at-large commissioner, Pamela.
Oh, okay, great.
Okay, I think that's all of the commissioners. Can we go to Michelle?
Michelle Mooney, Salt Lake City Mayor's Office Equity Manager.
Maria?
Maria Romero, Executive Assistant to the Chief Equity Officer.
Then I see that we have is it Mia or Maya?
It's Mia. Mia Tadesse, Equity and Special Projects Intern under Michelle Mooney.
Okay. And then Hannah?
Hannah Regan, Policy and Legislative Assistant in the Salt Lake City Mayor's Office.
Right, and then I see Jake's iPhone.
Sorry about that. Just listening in. This is Jake Maxwell, the Deputy Director of Economic Development.
All right, well, thank you everybody for joining us. Let's give our new commissioners a moment to introduce themselves. Start with Will.
Hi, everyone. Will Terry. I live in District 4. I'm actually just like a block away from the city building. I am actually here now. It's my bad. I probably should have let you guys know sooner that I was going in person so you could let me know not to come in person, but that is my bad. So apologies, but I am excited to kind of get started and just, get involved.
Hey, Will, could you give us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so I currently work at Equality Utah as the political action coordinator. I've been kind of involved in the community a little bit before that. I worked campaigns, like various municipal campaigns throughout the city. I graduated back in 2019, so the whole professional career is kind of relatively new. I mean, for 3 or 4 years, but yeah, just a little bit about me.
Thanks.
Okay, Pamela, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Pamela Silberman, and I also live in District 4. I have lived in Salt Lake City for 27 years and been very involved in the community, both through my work and community service. I served 7 years on Salt Lake City CDCIP board and really enjoyed it. I work I work for an organization, a global humanitarian organization called Church World Service, overseeing all their Afghan programs, serving the Afghan refugees who arrived in the past couple of years. And this job is fully remote. And so I'm not involved in my local community through my work anymore. I did work for the International Rescue Committee for 6 years prior to this. And so I was looking for an opportunity to be involved in the community since I work from home, and Church World Service doesn't really have a presence in Salt Lake. They have an affiliate office in Logan, Cache Refugee and Immigrant Center. So we'll be working with them some, but just looking for an opportunity to be more involved in my community, and saw that there was an opening on the commission. So.
Okay, do either of you have any questions for us before we jump into the agenda? All right.
Well, Jason, maybe we should at least introduce ourselves a little bit other than our names.
Okay. That's
I'll go
probably a good
first.
idea.
So I'm David Lita, District 6. I am retired, although for 46 years I practiced law in this community. I'm a law graduate of the University of Utah, 1976. That's a long time ago, probably before Will was born. And my area of expertise was commercial bankruptcy work. I also serve as one of the board members, the second vice chair for the East Bench Community Council. And I live on the East Bench. I'm also a board member of the 4th Street Clinic, which principally provides healthcare services to people experiencing homelessness. And I'm very active in other community organizations. And since I retired, effective at the end of last year, I really enjoy serving on this commission. And on the commission, I really have 2 subcommittee roles. One is I'm involved with basically human rights issues involving people experiencing homelessness, and also a newly formed subcommittee dealing with young people, principally preschoolers that have human rights issues. And so that's really my role on the commission.
Thank you, David. Well, my name is Jason Wessel again. I've got a PhD in Middle East Studies with a collection of other degrees behind that primarily I would use to teach, but there's not any positions to teach Middle East history locally, so taking a break from that. I'm in my 7th year on the Human Rights Commission, so this will be my last year, so I'm chair this year. I am also on the Rose Park Community Council, vice chair there. I'm representing Rose Park on the West Side Coalition, and I know I'm forgetting something, so I can't say no when people ask me to volunteer for something, so I'm kind of spread all over the place.
Community Recovery Committee, Jason.
Oh yeah, that's it. That's the one that I'm in the grant committee for the ARPA funding that Jake's overseeing, so gets to see. Yeah, anyway. That's probably the toughest of all of these assignments, deciding who gets money and who doesn't. Anyway, I'm kind of involved in most of the different subcommittees, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. We do need somebody to take charge of the refugees and new Americans, which I don't want to put you on the spot, but it sounds like that might be something right up your alley, Pamela, if you'll consider it. Anyway, I think getting back to the agenda, we let me see, what was it next? Michelle, can you give us an update on the vacancies?
Yes, so now that we have filled our final at-large commissioner vacancy, as well as District 4, we still have District 5 and District 7 open. There have been one application for both of them that we will review with the chair and vice chair in our next chair and vice chair meeting. However, if there are still people in these districts, please let them know to apply, because again, with the Human Rights Commission, we do focus on having a representation of the city. So we want to make sure that we're hitting different types of identities within that, if at all possible. So yes, we are still open for those vacancies, just in case it doesn't get approved by the chair and vice chair, but I will submit that to them in the coming weeks.
All right, thank you. Hopefully, well, I believe we have the minutes to review and approve from our meeting last month. Did everybody get a chance to look at those?
I move to approve the minute.
Okay, so we have a motion to adopt the minutes as presented. Do we have a second? I'll
second it. I'll
Okay.
second it, even though I wasn't there. So I assume I can't vote to approve them, but I don't know if I can second them.
Okay, so it's been seconded. You can abstain if you wish
Yeah.
from approving the minutes. So we'll just go through this then by roll call, since we won't have it by acclamation. So I'll vote yes. David, how do you vote?
Yes.
Pamela, how do you vote?
Abstain.
Will, how do you vote?
Abstain.
All right, with 2 yeses and 2 abstentions, I'm going to rule that motion passes. And we've adopted the March minutes. So moving on to the next item on the agenda. We have public comments. There aren't any members of the public joining us on Zoom, and I don't believe that we have an in-person meeting, so we can pass over that part of the agenda unless I am wrong about that. Yep,
You're
no,
correct.
yeah, no members of the public. So next item, that'll take us into the legislative session review. So I will hand off control to Hannah to run the meeting.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. All right, readjust my setup so I can still see you. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Hannah Regan, pronouns she, her. I'm wearing a white turtleneck, some gold hoops, and I'm in a gray room. And I am a policy and legislative assistant in the Salt Lake City's mayor's office. I'm here to give you an overview of the 2023 legislative session, specifically on the bills that dealt with human rights. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm going to give you a pretty brief overview, only because I don't want us to be here for 5 hours combing through all the nitty-gritty of all of these bills. So I'm going to go cover these bills by topic. I'll pause at the end of each topic for any questions. And then at the very end, I'm going to kind of go through how to be a good advocate, as a citizen, as a commission, and the like. So I am going to go ahead and get started. And it's a little, I can't see everyone. So either if you have a question, just shout it out when I ask for them. Or if you raise your hand, I can let you know you can unmute, but there's not that many of us. So shouting out should be fine. So we're going to get started with abortion access and care as our first topic. First, we have HB 297. There's 2 parts to this bill. The first part is victim services. So this bill requires that certain information be made available when an individual calls a sexual assault hotline service. As well, it requires law enforcement to go through annual trainings on how to respond to investigations of sexual assault and sexual traumas. And it requires law enforcement agencies to create a best practices set for responding to sexual assault calls, and for an annual report to be created and sent to the State Commission on Criminal and Juvenile Justice. Then the other side of this bill is abortion access. This bill basically restricts abortion access to before 18 weeks of gestational age, including abortion care for pregnancies which are the result of rape or incest. With both of these bills, there's a lot of intricacies on what the exceptions are to this 18-week rule. So I would suggest going through, it's kind of hard to lay them all out without just reading the bill line by line. But basically, with minor exception, this bill and HB 467 set up a ban on abortion care after 18 weeks. Moving on to HB 467, abortion.
Hey, Hannah,
Oh,
as
yes.
you go through, I'm sorry.
No, it's
you
okay.
asked me to shout out.
No,
I'm
you're
shouting
okay.
out. As you go through these bills, would you indicate whether the mayor's office or the city took a position on in the legislature and what the position was?
Yes.
I understand you're going to tell us what the outcomes are.
Yes.
But can you tell us also whether the mayor's office took a position and what that position was?
So my job during the session was maintaining the legislative tracking system. So it wasn't so much the mayor's office that took positions, but the city as a whole. So the internal policy team combed through the comments from the various departments. And for the most part, the mayor's office didn't submit a individual comment in that bill. They were representatives sitting in on the meeting. I don't have those quite on hand, and the system is kind of tricky to go through. Would it be all right if I sent a follow-up email with all of the positions.
That'd be fine. And I'll amend my request to indicate what the city's position was.
Yes.
Okay, if you know, and if you don't know, that's fine too. I'm just curious.
Yeah, well, I have all of them in the system. So I will go through first thing tomorrow and put that together into the packet that I have written up, and then I'll get that to you. Just otherwise I'll be clicking around and it might just take longer than I thought, but that is a good request and I will get that for you. Okay. Back to HB 467. So this bill, abortion clinic licensing, this bill effectively shuts down all abortion clinics on or after January 1st, 2024. After May 2nd of this year, the state will no longer be issuing new or renewing licenses for existing abortion clinics. What that means is all abortion care will now happen in hospitals. It was said in the committee hearing for this bill that currently hospitals are not equipped to provide this care necessarily, nor do they prefer to give this type of care. They prefer for patients to go to clinics. So this will put an extra burden onto hospitals in the state to be able to provide a form of care that they previously typically did not provide. As well, this bill puts in that 18-week ban with some exceptions. And this bill, the exceptions are a little bit more convoluted about physician reporting and the like. And I can get into that, but it's all in the packet. And also the packet has links to the bills themselves if you want to comb through them. None of them are too long. Some of them make more sense than others. So those are both of the bills on abortion access and care. Are there any other questions on these bills?
My understanding is that the ACLU and Planned Parenthood have filed a lawsuit against HB 467. If they'll get an injunction, most likely, about implementation of it, but if they're successful in the lawsuit, does the whole bill go away or just the portion about the clinics?
I am not sure, but and just in general, I'm not a policy expert, so I'm going to answer all of your questions to the absolute best of my abilities. And when I don't know the answer, I'm going to write your question down, ask, the attorney's office or another expert in the city, and I will compile an email as soon as I get those answers and pass that information back to you. So let me write that down. And I'll make sure to get that because that is a great question and I simply do not know the answer. Are there any other questions about abortion access and care before we move on to the next topic? Okay. All right. So next we have domestic violence. This was a really big year for this topic. There was at least the funding for victim services at least doubled this year compared to previous years. This is a very personal topic for the Lieutenant Governor, and she actually put forward a bill that was then sponsored by, I believe, Todd Weiler, sorry. And so there was a lot done, and I expect that next session we will see a lot more bills put forward or funding requests made. So first we have HB 18, online dating safety amendments, which requires service providers to provide certain safety information and make certain safety disclosures to members, just in terms of best practices for online dating and other information just to make meeting people online a little bit safer since that has become so popular. Then we have HB 43, domestic violence modifications, which creates the Domestic Violence Data Task Force to coordinate and make recommendations to the legislature regarding the collection of domestic violence data in the state. So this bill type is pretty common, where they will create a task force that goes on for a year or two, which will come back with policy recommendations. This bill is one of the reasons why I think that next session we will also be seeing a lot of funding requests or bills for victim services and the like. So this bill is basically a bill to create more bills next year. Then we have HB 53, protective order amendments, which allows an individual to enter the premises of an alleged victim when accompanied by a law enforcement officer after the alleged victim has been notified a couple times, just to make it safer for the alleged victim, to have the individual come and collect their personal belongings from, a home or the like. So this is a victim services bill. Next, we have HB 199, which prohibits law enforcement agencies from returning a firearm to an owner who is a restricted person or who has been arrested on a domestic violence offense. So this bill is making sure that everyone in Utah is lawfully possessing a firearm, and that abusers are not being able to get their firearms back. Next, we have HB 314, Remedies for Victims of Domestic Violence Amendments, which allows a renter who is a victim of domestic violence to terminate their future obligations under their rental agreement within certain restrictions around previous compliance to that rental agreement. So my understanding of this bill is as long as they have been complying with that rental agreement and they meet certain, I think it's like a submission and reporting requirements, they're able to break their lease and hopefully find safer housing arrangements. Finally, in this category, we have SB 117, Domestic Violence Amendments. This is the Lieutenant Governor's bill, and it requires law enforcement officers to conduct a lethality assessment when responding to a report of domestic violence, and requires the Department of Public Safety to develop and maintain a database of these assessments. So while HB 43 is probably only going to be about a year and provide recommendations for the 2024 legislature, this bill sets up an ongoing mechanism for data to be collected on domestic violence and hopefully can be used to affect positive change for victims and victim services going forward. So those are all of the domestic violence bills. Do we have any questions on this category?
So just a quick question on HB 314. You're saying that if a victim of domestic violence has signed a lease, even if the landlord was not involved in the domestic violence, the victim can terminate the lease without any financial consequence because the domestic violence occurred on the premises or occurred anywhere.
So my understanding of the bill is that it occurred between the leasees. So if you have a partner who is living with you, and I'm assuming they both have to be on the lease, if one of the leasees commits and is, I'm assuming, also convicted of domestic violence on those grounds, then the lease can be broken. I would be happy to ask the attorney's office for a more nitty-gritty breakdown of the bill, but that would be my understanding of the bill.
Okay, I mean, it seems kind of harsh for the landlord. But
I think from my understanding, and I have worked with survivors of domestic violence, but it's because, even if there isn't a conviction, oftentimes perpetrators violate protective orders. And so frequently survivors need to move to a place that the perpetrator is unable to find them. And if they have penalties for breaking their lease, that makes it really financially difficult for them to move into a place that's safe, that their perpetrator doesn't know where they're living. And so I think that's the motivation behind it, is to allow survivors to go to new places where their perpetrators can't find them.
Well, I think that's very laudable, Pamela. I mean, and I understand the motivation. Just seems like the landlord should be compensated by the state somehow, or by somebody, for no longer having a tenant. But, I guess they get the premises back so they can release it to somebody else. And in a market where there's a demand for rental properties, it's probably not a problem. And the reverse market, it might be kind of unfair to the landlord. But, I understand what the motivation is.
Well, in general, we're a very landlord-friendly state. I'm sure that they'll come out ahead on when all is said and done. But I had a question about the SB 117. Do you know much about what the lethality assessments are? Is this a existing procedure that law enforcement has, or are they going to have to come up with something?
So from my understanding, I did watch the committee hearings for this bill specifically. They are pre-existing assessments that have, I believe, a lot of data to back up their success rates with tracking alleged abusers and keeping victims safe. So I believe that these are existing things and they don't need to be created by any individual police department.
Thank you.
No worries. All right, if those are all the questions on this topic, we're going to move forward to family and childcare. The first bill here is HB 40, Native American Child and Family Amendments. This bill enacts ICWA, the Indian Child Welfare Act, into Utah state law. ICWA is currently under review by the U.S. Supreme Court, and my understanding is that it is fairly likely to be overturned. So if that is the case, it will be Utah state law, and things will not be changing in Utah. Next, we have HB 48, Early Childhood Amendments, which creates the Early Childhood Utah Advisory Council, which will provide information on services available for children in early childhood, facilitate coordination between state agencies and community partners, and share and analyze information regarding early childhood issues. So this council is fairly similar to a task force, except instead of reporting policy recommendations to the legislature, it will submit those recommendations to the to various state departments on early childhood issues. And so the sunset period is a lot longer. I can't remember if there's one in this bill exactly, but it wouldn't be just 1 year. Finally, we have HB 167, State Child Care Amendments. This bill allows an agency to enter into a contract with a licensed child care center to operate an on-site center for the benefit of employees. As a little bit of a sidebar, when I first started working for the city about 9 or 10 months ago, I did a good amount of research into childcare in Utah, and the childcare gap in Utah and Salt Lake City is pretty wide. So this bill will hopefully help to narrow that gap just a little bit, even though this is mostly geared towards state agencies. And hopefully we'll see more bills going forward that continue to narrow that childcare gap so that all working families are able to get the childcare that they need. Are there any questions on any of these bills?
On HB 48, how
Mhm.
are members of the advisory council selected?
I will review the bill and get back to you on that. I don't have that written down accessibly, or but I will review the bill again and get that back to you. Are there any other questions? Okay. Moving on to law enforcement. The first bill is HB 57, Law Enforcement Investigation Amendments. This bill requires agencies to submit an annual report on information with how many reverse location warrants were requested and granted and what information was obtained through these warrants. And then there will be a database where all this information is kept. This bill is partially privacy and also just making sure that law enforcement agencies are keeping up with technology. So pretty straightforward bill there. Next, we have HB 60, Juvenile Justice Modifications. This bill prohibits employers from discriminating against individuals with a delinquency history, with some exceptions in certain fields, and creates a process for expungement of juvenile records. The expungement process is a little tricky, and I'm personally not super familiar with it, so it was pretty hard for me to summarize, but I'd be happy to get in touch with PD and have them write it out in a more understandable way for you if my summary is a little complicated. And then next we have HB 111, Inmate Treatment Amendments. This bill requires county and municipal jails to allow medication-assisted substance abuse treatment for inmates who being conducted by a state-approved entity for inmates who were active clients prior to incarceration to continue. So if you were being treated for substance abuse prior to incarceration, now you can be treated even after you are incarcerated. Next, we have HB 181, Offender Employment Amendments, which requires the Department of Workforce Services to create and maintain a web page through which job opportunities which are available to individuals with criminal histories are posted, and requires the Division of Human Resource Management to provide information and guidance to the two state agencies, which encourages them to hire individuals with criminal histories. Finally, we have SB 49, with Juvenile Custodial Interrogation Amendments, which extends the amount of time a minor who is alleged to have committed an act that would be a criminal offense if they were an adult can be detained in holding from 2 hours to 4 hours. So those are the law enforcement amendments. Do we have any questions on those? Yes.
I have just, on the previous page,
Mhm.
the one about the database for the reverse location warrants. What is a reverse location warrant? I don't know
So-
what that is.
Yeah, my understanding, and I didn't know what these were when I was watching the committee hearings, and I'm pretty sure I understand them now. Basically, if you have using someone's phone, and using technology to track people, is what a reverse location warrant is. I'm gonna triple check that, and if I'm wrong, I will correct myself in an email. But I'm fairly confident that that is what a reverse location warrant is.
In a similar vein, the following bill, what's the
Mhm.
delinquency history defined as?
Delinquency history is just the juvenile criminal record. And the bill that deals with both. It kind of refers to them sort of interchangeably. So that is what a delinquency history is. Juvenile delinquent, I believe.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. Any other questions? All right. Now we're moving on to public health. Not a whole lot in public health this session besides the resurgence of the vaccine passport prohibition bill, which was first numbered in 2022 and failed. This bill prohibits government entities from denying services or entry based on immunity status, and prohibits government entities from requiring employees to receive a vaccine, with exceptions for certain fields. So those fields are higher education, childcare programs, working in public health or other medical settings, and there are a couple other exceptions listed in the bill. Is there any questions about HB 131?
So is this specific to COVID, or is this cover immunity status on everything?
It only refers to immunity status. So I believe it is a blanket bill. However, it was written, I believe, with COVID in mind. And to give you some context, I think the reason why it failed a year ago and passed this year is because a lot of opposition came out a year ago against this bill. And then this year, because, even though we are, of course, still living through a pandemic, life has returned much more to normal than where we were in, say, 2021. So I think that opposition had sort of maybe died down in terms of enthusiasm, but not in their feelings. So that's why this bill had a resurgence and then was able to pass pretty early on in the session.
So Hannah.
Yeah.
Would a school qualify as a governmental entity under this bill?
I believe that schools are one of the things listed under the exception. But let me double check that. And
Yeah, I'm thinking about, the required shots for
yes.
measles, mumps, and that kind of thing that kids often get and sometimes are required to have to attend schools or participate in other activities that are communal in nature.
I believe based on the exclusion of higher education, I would assume that would extend down to elementary and secondary schools as well. But I'll double check that and let you know. But I think children will still have to get their vaccines. I think this is much more geared towards, places like the city and county, but the city and the like. Are there any other questions? Okay, next we have accessibility. First, we have HB 141, driver's license test amendments, which allows individuals to take certain driver's license exams in that individual's preferred language. Believe that they're going to start with 5 of the most common languages spoken in Utah, with the potential to expand to more. This includes translated tests, as well as having a translator on hand. And then next we have HB 162, voter accessibility amendments, which requires elections officers to facilitate accessible voting for individuals with disabilities, and for those elections officers to make available information on how to vote in this accessible manner prior to the election. Any questions on these 2 bills?
Just have a comment to make on HB 141. About a million years ago, or maybe a little closer to 20, when I was a legislative intern, there was a big push to pass English-only bills. They wanted to require all government services to be provided only in English. So it's remarkable to see how much things have changed, that the same legislature is now trying to accommodate people's preferred languages.
Yes, I agree. These 2 bills made me very happy. Next, we move on to personal expression. First, we have HB 163, protecting student religious and moral beliefs regarding athletic uniform requirements, which basically provides that students cannot be prohibited from wearing clothing consistent with their religious or moral beliefs in athletic programs. Then we have HB 427, which requires local education agencies to annually affirm that their instruction is consistent with an outlined set of principles. These principles broadly, I would describe as anti-discrimination, but I'll read you 2 of them from the bill to kind of help you understand what the goal of these principles are. First, that no individual is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously, solely by virtue of the individual's race, sex, or sexual orientation. Secondly, that an individual, by virtue of the individual's race or sex, does not bear responsibility for actions that other members of the same race or sex committed in the past or present. The other 3 principles are broadly anti-discrimination and equality principles, but I think those 2 really encapsulate what the intention of this bill is. Next, we have SB 18, Public Expression Protection Act, which replaces previous anti-SLAPP law. Anti-SLAPP laws are those which are meant to dismiss lawsuits that are filed to silence others from participating in public discourse by placing an overburdensome lawsuit against them. Finally, we have, in this subject, we have SB 152, Social Media Regulation Amendments, which creates a set of regulations around social media use for minors. So all social media platforms will now have to verify the age of all Utah users. If a user is a minor, there will need to be parental consent in order for this minor to have an account. This minor's account can only receive direct messages from mutuals, so accounts that have them as a friend or follow them that they have added as a friend back or followed back. And then none of that minor's personal information can be stored by the company or used by the company. And I believe that there's also there's not allowed to have targeted ads on these accounts. It also requires that parents have access to these accounts, whether through password sharing or other means. And finally, it sets a default time limit between 6:30 a.m. and 10:30 p.m. on the minor's account, which the parents are allowed to go in and modify, whether it be only allowable to use during certain times of the day or for a certain number of hours a day. So those are the personal expression bills. Are there any questions on these bills?
Could you go back to the prior page?
Yeah.
So with HB 163,
Mhm.
I'm kind of curious. If someone is a racist
Mhm.
and wants to wear racially offensive clothing and participate in an athletic activity wearing racially offensive
Mhm.
clothing, is that something that cannot be prohibited?
And have them make an argument that it's a moral belief.
Yeah, it's a
Um,
moral belief.
yeah,
I
so
I don't know. I'm just curious. I mean, it seems to me that I know what they're trying to do here by
Mhm.
saying you can't prohibit somebody who has a religious predisposition or belief from expressing that in a, but I can see this as a window or doorway for just the opposite.
Yeah. I do not believe that there's a mechanism in this bill for determining what a, legitimate religious or moral belief is. Obviously, the intent is if your child, wears a head covering of some kind or needs athletic clothing to be more modest for whatever reason. I think, obviously that's the intent, but I understand what you're saying. And I do not believe that there's a mechanism in the bill which provides, this is okay, this is not okay.
Yeah, could you look into that as to
Yes.
what's defined as religious and moral beliefs, if any? Because there's been a lot of talk about sovereign citizens.
Mhm.
There are, a lot of people that are proud, consider themselves Proud Boys or
Yeah.
other forms of organizations that they might very well consider to be moral beliefs, or even religious beliefs.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I
that's the
can't-
the slipperiness with a lot of these bills is that even though they're meant to set up definitions at the top of each bill, the definitions are not always solid. And sometimes that's great. And other times like this, it can leave the door open for a lot of bad things that were not in the legislative intent. Are there any other questions on these bills? Okay. Next, we're going into gender affirming care. So this topic kind of encapsulates the first couple weeks of the session. In 2022, I didn't live in Utah at the time, but from what I've heard, these types of bills kind of came in the last couple days, and this really characterized the last few days of the session. Meanwhile, this session, these bills and others like it, I would put the vaccine ban, passport prohibition bill sort of in this broader sphere happened within the first 2 weeks. So first we have SB 16, transgender medical treatments and procedure amendments, which broadly just prohibits minors from receiving hormonal treatment and sex characteristic surgery, with the exception that if you received a diagnosis of gender dysmorphia before the bill was enacted, then you can either continue your hormonal treatment plan or your plans for sex characteristic surgery, or you can start your plan as long as you have that diagnosis. As well, this bill requires the Department of Health and Human Services to conduct a study on medical evidence regarding hormonal treatments, and it requires the Division of Professional Licensing to create a certification for providing providing hormonal treatments. So this bill was kind of put forward as making sure that these treatments were safe for children. And that's why there needed to be a blanket ban on them. Even though there is a study being conducted in this bill, there is no sunset period for the ban or for the study. So there's no promise that the legislature will return to this bill or this topic next session to if the study comes out that this one way or another, whether these treatments are safe on minors, there's no promise that they will return to this topic.
Is this with regardless of parental consent? In other
This
words,
is regardless of
this,
parental consent.
okay, so this would even prohibit parents
Yes.
or healthcare providers from consenting or providing this kind of treatment.
Yes. And so interestingly, I'll skip forward to SB 100, gender identity policies, which prohibits schools from disallowing parents access to their child's education records, and prohibits schools from making changes to a child's gender identity on that record without parental consent. SB 100 was argued as a parental rights bill. Parents should have a right to know their child's gender identity and to be able to control the government records on which their child's identity is reflected. And so proponents of that bill were making the parental rights argument, whereas opponents of SB 16 were saying, if it's my right to know the gender identity of my child, why is it not also my right to make judgments for the care of my child? So those were kind of the two arguments on either side. Obviously, both of these bills passed, and that argument that conflict was not resolved. But it's interesting that you bring that up, because that was one of the main arguments sort of floating around the kind of the committee hearings and the public comments and the floor comments while these bills were up for debate. And then otherwise, oh, sorry, Jason, you can go ahead.
I was just going to throw a question out there
Yeah.
that I don't know if you'll be able to answer or Will might be able to have some insight into, but combining hormonal treatment and sex characteristic surgery into one bill, those are two very different things. And as far as I know, there isn't any sex characteristic surgery taking place with minors. So it seems like that's more alarmist being combined with something that is stripping families of their rights. But anyway, I just wanted to the question I want to ask: sex characteristic surgery in minors, is that even a thing?
Will, if you can have a solid answer. I don't have a solid answer to that.
Yes, so I can fill in here. So it's very, very rare. Very rarely does it ever happen, especially in the state of Utah. It has happened on a few occasional times, and just something to kind of plug in with SB 16. It has been reviewed by multiple lawyers, and it is seen as kind of unconstitutional under equal protections. So that bill, there's going to be likely an injunction. So we'll see more on that. But it is, to answer your question, very rare, very rarely happens, though it has happened in the state of Utah.
And it was put forward, I believe, by Senator Plum during the committee hearing to separate these two things out, or to, kind of broaden the definition of sex characteristic surgery to what we would typically call plastic surgery. And there is an argument that is made, and that many agree with, that all plastic surgery is gender affirming care, regardless of whether you are transgender or cisgender. So lots of interesting arguments floating around these bills. And then the other bill in this topic is SB 93, birth certificate modifications, which creates allowances and regulations around changing your sex designation and your name on your birth certificate, specifically on changing your sex designation for certain intersex folks, as well as minors. So you have to be at least 15 and a half to change your sex designation on your birth certificate with parental consent. And those are the gender affirming care bills. Are there any questions on these bills? Any other questions?
So SB 100, in my experience in a classroom, generally there isn't a lot of record keeping taking place. It's you use the pronouns and the names that a child requests, and you just go with that. I don't understand how this is going to affect a teacher calling somebody by the name they've asked. Are they going to have to then report it to the administration, to the front office? Do they have to make a note of it? Because that's just not the way it works in a classroom.
Will, I saw you unmuted. Do you want to respond?
Yeah, so essentially this bill, if a child does individually ask a teacher to call them by the preferred pronouns or their preferred names, this bill doesn't necessarily speak to that. So this is only if a student wants to change their official records in school. So like when they get their report card, to have the report card say a different name, which is typically something that already happens. If there ever is a request of record changes, typically the parents are already notified. So yeah. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it's not as scary as it sounds then.
No, this one is no, not at all.
Yeah, this one was substituted pretty quickly. So we'll move on to firearms. So first we have HB 165, firearm discharge on private property amendments, which basically says that if someone else who is in lawful possession of a firearm discharges it on your property under other certain circumstances, you are not liable for something that happens, because even though it was on your property, not your gun, you didn't discharge it. Next, we have HB 219. This
Wait,
one,
wait a
oh,
minute, wait a
yes.
minute, before you go on. This says it provides that the property occupants,
Yes,
you mean owners?
owners and, sorry,
So people who
occupants.
live
Nope,
on
I
the
meant
regular.
occupants. I meant occupants. I meant, yes.
All right, so, okay, so if an occupant owns a firearm and
Mhm.
discharges it on the occupant's property, they can't be liable for whatever the consequence is of discharging that firearm?
Yes. Under other certain circumstances, which I don't have unfortunately written down in front of me.
Wait a minute, so if I'm an occupant, if I,
Uh-huh.
in my home, on my
Yes.
property, and I get on my AK-47, which of course I don't own, and I start discharging it at squirrels
Mhm.
that happen to be running around, I can't be held legally liable if that
No, so
damages?
I think what the intent of this bill is someone else. So I think it's if someone else is shooting squirrels on private property, and either you own it or you're renting there, you are not liable because you had your friend come over and they decided with their lawfully owned weapon to do something illegal,
Even though you allowed them on the property?
even though you allowed them on
I'd
the
really like to have you look into a little bit more
Yeah.
details
I
on this
will,
one.
yeah, I'll
that-
write
that
up
to
this
me
one in
seems-
greater detail.
Yeah, if I invite my friend over and he brings this weapon and he starts shooting things on my property, even though I've invited them there and he's got my consent, I can't be held liable for what he does or she does?
That is my loose understanding of this bill. I'm going to review it because I don't want to put my foot in my mouth too hard. But that, and if you thought that one was exciting, wait till you hear about HB 219, which prohibits the enforcement or cooperation of enforcement or implementation of federal regulations on firearms in the state of Utah. This bill will definitely have lawsuits that follow it, and I believe, I don't think this was said in committee or on the floor, but I believe that was the intent of this bill. So this bill will be very interesting to see. So my understanding as of right now, Utah's gun laws are the only thing that can be enforced in Utah. Next, we have HB 225. Firearm possession amendments, which requires law enforcement agencies to run a background check when returning a firearm from evidence to make sure that the owner is not a restricted person. So this bill just making sure that everyone who is in possession of a firearm in Utah is in lawful possession. Next, we have HB 300.
Quick question on
Yes.
219. Do you know who the sponsor of that bill was?
Lisenby.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I don't have all the sponsors memorized for all the bills. She did that one. She also did HB 467, the abortion clinics bill. A few of them have stuck out in my mind. But the state legislature website I have in the packet that has been sent out has all the links to the various bills, and the legislature website is great. Super easy to navigate. I'll get into a little bit more later. But really good for information and really easy, like user-friendly. But okay, back to HB 300, voluntary firearm restrictions, which creates the voluntary firearm restricted list that allows individuals to request to be restricted from purchasing or possessing a firearm. This can be done on a set temporary basis for a period of 30 days, 3 months, or on an indefinite basis. So
before you get off that subject.
Yeah.
If I'm a parent,
Mhm.
can I ask that my child, who might be a minor, be placed on a restricted individual list?
I don't believe the bill addresses that. I don't know. I'm not familiar with what the purchasing laws are in Utah. But I'd be happy to comb through code and dig that up for you.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of a situation where a parent may have a child who has behavioral issues,
Yes.
or has a tendency to act out, may even be suicidal,
Yeah.
and wants to do what the parent can to make sure that child does not have access to a firearm.
Yeah, I believe the intent of this bill is centered around individual mental health, but I'll come through code and see if that is a potential nuance that is there. And then the last bill in this topic is HB 461, Airport Firearm Possession Amendments, which provides that when a firearm that was seized as part of a criminal offense at the airport, which typically means accidentally bringing your gun through TSA, which apparently happens more than at least I thought, that firearm may be returned to the owner if the prosecuting attorney in the case determines that the firearm is no longer needed for court proceedings, and if the individual lawfully possesses the firearm. So the original iteration of this bill was that if an individual who is in lawful possession and is otherwise compliant with their gun accidentally brings it through TSA, attempts to bring it through TSA, that they originally in this bill would have been able to simply exit the airport, put it in their car, and then attempt to re-enter security. So this is a compromise between the various law enforcement agencies, airports, and the sponsor, because there otherwise previously was not a mechanism for the guns to be returned to their owners. And it was just sort of kind of left up to TSA and the local police jurisdiction. So any other questions on the firearms bills?
So this is kind of a strange curveball here, but
Yeah.
Wouldn't that constitute cooperating with a federal agency? TSA is under Homeland Security.
Yes. So
HB 461 is in violation of the bill from the previous page.
Because my understanding is that typically TSA will also kind of defer to local law enforcement. So I wonder if there's policy in local law enforcement jurisdictions in terms of bringing weapons onto planes or in airports. But that is a very interesting nuance to point out. So I don't know, but they might very well be in conflict with each other.
And maybe defer to the lawyer among us. Doesn't that previous page was it 416? I don't know. Isn't that in violation of the supremacy clause to forbid law enforcement cooperating with federal law enforcement? You're muted, David.
I am muted, sorry. I guess it really is going to depend on the interpretation of enforcement or cooperation. There is a supremacy clause in the Constitution. Federal law trumps state law. When it comes to federal laws governing firearms, that's why I think this bill is probably going to get challenged and probably going to be overturned as a violation of the supremacy clause. But I'm not, without really getting into the weeds on what the bill means by enforcement or cooperation. Cooperation is a little bit different. It just basically means standing down and not helping. But I'm not sure enforcement also might be interpreted to mean the state won't allow its officials to enforce federal law, but doesn't mean that the federal law itself is unenforceable by federal agents. So it's a good question, Jason, but I think the answer is probably in the weeds, and I'm not sure I can answer that.
Do we have any other questions on this topic? Okay, so lastly, we have the diversity, equity, and inclusion bills. So all of the bills that I previously presented on all passed until now. None of these bills on diversity, equity, and inclusion passed. As you'll notice, a lot of them have higher numbers, which means that they came out during, week 6, maybe even week 7 of the session. The legislators were numbering bills up until the very last day of committees, which it was a record-setting year for the numbers of bills. So I expect that these bills will make a return next session, or at the very least that these topics will come up during interim, which I'll touch on in a couple minutes, and may or may not then come up as new bills or the same bills next section. So first we have HB 428, labor and military training requirements limitations, which prohibits an individual to be subject to discrimination to achieve diversity, equity, inclusion in some employment circumstances. This one is mostly geared towards the military. In the similar vein, we have HB 451, which prohibits the use of a prohibited submission in determining employment, admission, or other benefits. Prohibited submissions are basically personal statements of opinion. And so the official definition, which includes a lot of lists, so my apologies if it's a little difficult to follow. Prohibited submissions include a submission, statement, or document that relates to a policy, program, or initiative regarding subjects such as diversity, equity, and inclusion. So basically, my reading on this, if you were to say that you did not like a certain DEI initiative that the city is doing, that could not necessarily preclude you from being hired or given benefits hired to or benefits from the city. And then the other bill, SB 283, the study of diversity, equity, inclusion in higher ed, would have proposed, also again, this did not pass, would have proposed to create a study during the 2023 interim session regarding DEI in institutions of higher ed. So the size of these offices, their sources of funding, the roles and objectives of their programs, the impacts of these offices and their programs on educational outcomes, and what the effects would be of prohibiting such offices in higher ed. And then after conducting this study, they would submit policy recommendations to legislators for 2024. So again, this did not pass, but that does not mean that this subject will not come up during interim. So there might not be a formal study being done on this specific topic, but I imagine that because this became so prevalent during the last few days of committee hearings, it will be coming up in the coming months during interim. Are there any questions on these bills?
Anna, do any of these proposed bills on DEI prohibit either admissions or employment decisions from being made based on a person's diversity or the need for equity or inclusion?
So I believe that the goal of HB 428 is to do exactly that in specifically for the military. So yes, in certain fields, yes, and it would not surprise me if more expansive bills were to come under review during interim and were to come up next session. Depending, I would say, on how prevalent the topic is nationally in a few months, because obviously right now this topic is really prevalent in national discourse. And so as these topics kind of tend to ebb and flow, this may or may not be an ongoing issue.
Well, there's a case pending right now before the United States Supreme Court dealing with this very issue on whether it's constitutional for a school of higher education that's receiving federal funding to make admissions decisions based on a person's racial background or ethnic background.
Hannah, can you go back to the freedom of expression bills for a minute?
Yes. So here's the
So,
first.
yeah, so that one, HB 427.
Uh-huh.
That is like an anti-CRT type bill, right? That they can't teach things that would make people feel bad about their race. Is that what you were saying?
So without saying that much, I believe the answer is yes. It is colloquially, and this is me saying this as an individual, you cannot make white children feel bad about being white, and you cannot make, you know, specifically young white men feel bad about being young white men. I don't know how strict these, you know, how much the state is going to enforce compliance with these principles, but it requires that local education agencies annually affirm. How binding that affirmation is, I'm not sure, but I'm sure that it is something that can come up in school board meetings and the like, saying you signed this set of principles that you're affirming. However, you're also teaching this. How tight that is, I am not sure. And I think that could potentially be something that school boards, that'll come up in various school board discussions.
Right.
But I don't know what this, you know, this bill is very much just says that they have to annually sign an affirmation, and here are the principles that they are affirming.
And are the principles just the two that you read, that people
No,
can't
they
be
are
made to
all
feel
here. I
bad
can-
and that they're not responsible for stuff that happened before they were born or whatever? it
No,
was?
there's also that no race is inherently superior or inferior to another race, that no person should be subject to discrimination or adverse treatment solely or partially on the basis of the individual's race, color, national origin, religion, disability, sex, or sexual orientation, that meritocracy or character traits, including hard work ethic, are not racist nor associated with or inconsistent with any racial or ethnic group. And then the two that I read earlier.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it kind of opens the door for like parents to go in and say that the education that the school is providing doesn't align with these principles and it's making their kids feel bad about, you know,
Yes.
being white or whatever.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
No worries. Any other questions on any of the other bills that I have talked about today?
So the diversity, equity, and inclusion bills,
Uh-huh.
Were these originated with ALEC, or are these just kind of ALEC adjacent with our
So
own language put in?
yeah, I am not sure who had, you know, put their pen to paper on writing these bills. I would very much be happy to look into that. And if how similar they are to other bills across the country, because I know that's a similar issue with the gender affirming care bills that I presented as well, that those bills typically come from other organizations.
I just kind of get a strange sense of deja vu that the language, the way you've described these, sound very familiar to me, to something I've read about elsewhere. So I thought it might be one of the ALEC bills, but that's not as important as some of those other questions.
Any other questions? All right, so the last thing I'll kind of touch on today is just about the timeline of the session and advocacy. So the general legislative session is 45 days, shortest in the nation, between January and March of each year. Bills have to go through a general process of Rules Committee in the Chamber of Origin, Standing Committee in that chamber, floor of that chamber, then to the Standing Committee of the opposite chamber and the floor of the opposite chamber. So the general day of a legislator is appropriations hearings, Standing Committee hearings, lunch, and then either floor time, lunch, and then either more floor time, more standing committees, and then sometimes after all of that, more appropriations hearings. So during the session, legislators are booked. They are, you know, every minute of the day, someone's trying to pull at their ear, they're having meetings. So while everyone is trying to, you know, get a little piece of their time, they're even though they really do listen and they really are generally easy to get a hold of, during the session is probably when they're in the highest demand. So right now, we're in the first week of interim. Interim goes from April to November, is the best time to reach out to legislators and develop those relationships. Interim committee hearings happen once a month per committee. You can find the schedule on the state legislator website. The agendas are posted 24 hours in advance. There is space for public comment. It can be given in person, and the location and a map to the rooms is provided on the website, or it can be given virtually. So this is the best time to develop those relationships. Like I said, if, especially with those DEI bills, like bills that failed, but are likely to come up again, now is the best time to reach out to your legislators and say, I'd love to meet with you on this topic, or to propose to work with them on a potential bill for 2024. And starting, the real work of the general session for 2024 starts this week. Because once you're in January, yes, bills get substituted and dramatically changed during the session. Real work gets done, things are happening, but they're happening so fast. And right now is when you can take the time to slow down and develop that rapport and really, get that good work in before. So my suggestion to you would be to contact your legislators now while they have just come back from their vacation, and they're, and they do have other jobs. For the most part, they are part-time, but they are also, still kind of keyed into this work so that you will be able to get the most time with them now. So that is all I have. Are there any questions on this or anything else that I presented today?
I just wanted to add on to what you just said. I was speaking with several legislators that I'm friendly with a couple of weeks ago, and they were kind of shell-shocked from this last session, that it was one of the most radical and most extreme sessions they've ever experienced. But also, they're a bit worried about what's going to be coming up in the interim sessions. They don't think that some of these bills are going to be waiting until next February. They believe that they're going to be blindsided probably quite regularly through the interim session. So I think it's important for us to keep on top of what's coming up at those sessions and find out if we need to respond rapidly to any of the more extreme things that they weren't able to get through this last session.
That's an excellent comment, Jason. And Hannah, I don't know, I don't want to add to your work list.
No,
but-
you're all good.
But based on the position you hold in city government, and based on the role of this commission, it would be very helpful to know what bills are being proposed that impact human rights. So that and where those bills are likely to be discussed in committee, and then maybe this commission can focus some of its energies on those particular bills and do some lobbying with the representatives on the committees that are going to consider those bills. That would be very helpful information for us to have, I think.
Yeah, I would be happy to keep an eye on that. I had a lot of fun keeping an eye on them during the session. So I'd be happy to keep monitoring them for y'all. And, Jason, what you said is super, relevant. I think if we learned anything, especially for me, at least from the teacher scholarship bill, alongside the scholarship bill that also put together the raises, is that some of these legislators are willing to push through bills without much regard for public input. And it would be, all groups need to be on high alert to make sure that they are able to contact their legislators immediately and understand what's coming down the pipeline. Because the second that it's, on that agenda in a standing committee meeting, if you can't get your group together until maybe a day or so later, you might be completely behind. depending on your organizing power. So there was a lot learned this session, and I agree, a lot of whiplash, especially with, I think it was close to 1,500 bills numbered. Or 1,300-ish. Very high numbers and lots of substitutes. So lots of information to take in. I will get these questions sent out as soon as I can. I'll send you some of the information that I can grab quickly to you tomorrow. So we'll have a nice email thread going as I get answers back. And if anything comes up, you can just, you have my email now. So please feel free to email me if you want to set up a meeting just to talk through some more things, or just shoot me a question. I'd be super happy to answer. Or if I don't know the answer, ask someone who has the answer. But thank you again so much for having me. I really do appreciate your time.
Hannah, this has been incredibly helpful, and it was a very good presentation, well organized. Thank you very much. Jason, Michelle, Maria, I may have mentioned in an email, I have another commitment that I have to leave for. So I'm sorry, but may I be excused from the balance of this meeting?
I believe that we covered the substantive stuff up front that would require any voting, so there isn't going to be a requirement for any voting, so you're welcome to go. So yes. Hannah, thank you. In the past, we have offered to write letters or pen an op-ed on human rights related issues that have come up before the when they've arisen. I think about half a dozen times I've tried to draft something, but we haven't been able to come to consensus on the language, so it hasn't materialized. But the makeup of the commission has changed radically since then. So I think that if that is something that would be of use at some point, consider us to be another tool or asset that could be used to try to, in the persuasion phase. I mean, lobbying is where you're trying to convince the legislators to vote one way or the other, but in the public persuasion phase, I think we would be useful in something like an op-ed in the Tribune or the Deseret News, or you need people to advocate for or speak for some of these issues. We've got a broad range of expertise on this commission, so keep us in mind when something like that comes up.
I will definitely let the internal policy team know. That's very good to hear. Thank you so much. And thank you all again. I do appreciate your time.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you again. Okay, so I think we're running a little bit behind schedule, but that was a large info dump. Is everybody ready to move on to the next item on the agenda, or do you need a minute? I'll take that we can move forward. All right, so now we have to review our subcommittee update. Some of these subcommittees are not functioning right now. We don't have anybody on gentrification or refugees and new Americans, so we'll be able to skip over those. Children and youth advocacy is something that Esther wanted to get up and running, but I don't think we've had a meeting on that yet.
Yes, we have.
Oh, we have. Sorry, I wasn't able to attend that one. So homelessness, David was heading that up, but I'm also involved with that. I can say with homelessness, the next Salt Lake Valley Commission to End Homelessness meeting is happening in a week and a half. There'll be a big information dump from that. So if you could give us the update on CDAW and the Children and Youth Advocacy subcommittees, I'd appreciate it.
Yes. So for the Children and Youth Advocacy Subcommittee, like David mentioned briefly earlier, I think they want to start with preschool, very young age right now. That might change after we actually have our meeting with the city's Youth and Families Department. They might be able to see that they can help a larger scope of youth and children without having to, I guess, be within a certain scope. But from our meeting, that's what they felt like, so that they're not taking on too much at one time. And right now they're working to look into all of the organizations throughout the city that have an impact on children. And that's kind of how we left it there. It was an introductory meeting just to see what kind of organizations they should reach out to outside of Voices for Utah Children, which is already on the list, as well as working with the city's internal Department of Youth and Families that already does programs for children and youth. And then for CEDAW, that task force is coming soon. As of now, we're thinking to have 2 CEDAW socials, kind of like just to engage the community in what CEDAW is, right? So we passed the big ordinance, and for the newer commissioners, this is, if you've never heard it in that acronym, it's the Convention on the Elimination Against All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And that I did meet with Kilo Zamora, gender equity researcher, and he's been working with the city in various capacities. So from there, I've got around 10 contacts that I am reaching out to in terms of, one, if they would be willing to host a session so that we can have these sessions outside of the city and county building. As much as we love the city and county building, it's nice to actually get in the community, especially when this is something that affects them. So this is what we're trying to work on right now. And applications for that will be forthcoming. But right now we want to make sure that we're getting the community buy-in and they know that this is happening, because I'm not sure that everyone knows that this has passed and all of that good stuff. And then last thing I wanted to add, so Will touched base with me, and Will is willing to actually head up the gentrification subcommittee. So we will be working on that together.
Awesome. That's one where you don't know what you don't know till you start delving into it and find out how much zoning and code and overlays and all of that. You just get lost in the wilderness. So thank you for that, Will. And then Pamela.
Yeah,
on
could
the
you
spot.
just talk a little bit about like what's involved with the subcommittees, what sort of commitment it is, what's sort of the goal of the subcommittees? You mentioned the refugee and immigrant one. Obviously that pertains to my, the work that I do, but just wanted to know more about what is involved with the subcommittees.
So the way we envisioned it was that we were going to be able to focus in a smaller group on specific area issues and have somebody who's more versed in the topic be kind of an area issue manager to coordinate, facilitate, hold the meetings, and kind of give some direction to it. Because a lot of times it was 7 of us in a meeting once a month, and then nothing that would happen in between. So we were trying to get things happening between monthly meetings, area specific, and it's sort of free and loose with whoever is running that particular area manager can give it direction, structure, whatever. It's sort of your own baby that you then bring to the rest of us and ask for help. Or like in the case of the homelessness one, a lot of it, there's just too many other entities and agencies out there doing things. So I passively participate and get the information and then bring it back to us. There's not a whole lot for the Salt Lake City Human Rights Commission to do when there's Andrew Johnston as the homelessness coordinator, and there's all the other different layers. So it's more just being in the room and getting updates on the information. However, with CEDAW, that was very, very organized, very structured on a focus on getting a previous resolution adopted by the city council as an ordinance. So there were concrete steps that we had to take. But anyway, this is a lot of words to say there isn't any specific way to do it. If you have your area of expertise and you know that there's something that you would like the Human Rights Commission to be more involved with in that refugees and new Americans arena, then you bring it to us, ask for help, put together the subcommittee, and give instructions on what you would like to see get done, what you would like to accomplish, and we're all here at your disposal. Did I cover it, Michelle, or did I just completely throw everybody off track?
No, I think you did cover it. Subcommittees again, because we don't have a lot of time in this general meeting. And I like to bring different departments in, or it can even help with your subcommittee as well. So Pamela, you had missed this one. Well, Pamela and Will. But we did bring in Roxana Orellana, who is the policy advisor for refugees and new Americans, as well as Chris Hansen, the volunteer coordinator for, why am I blanking on this? For Know Your Neighbor, sorry, for Know Your Neighbor. So the Refugee and New American Subcommittee, clearly we would love to have you, as Jason and I are kind of hinting towards. We do need a new chair of that subcommittee. That subcommittee meets on Tuesdays once a month, the second Tuesdays at 4 p.m. And it's only an hour long. All of the subcommittee meetings do happen virtually. If we feel that maybe you won't need a subcommittee meeting, kind of like how Jason works with homelessness, but in a different capacity, that might look similar to how gentrification kind of works too. But the reason for the Refugee and New American, as well as the Children and Youth, is Children and Youth is new, and then the Refugee and New American Subcommittee, Roxana will partner with us on that. So if you want to make policy recommendations, this is like the place to do it. We have our policy advisor right on that subcommittee, and then you would come back to the general meeting like today and then just give an update. Policy is a big thing, so whatever, literally what Jason said, whatever you want to make of it, you kind of have free reign, as long as we can get it to mayor, city council, get it passed, all of these things, and go through these steps. But we just need an idea of what you are thinking for this subcommittee, for any of them. Is that pretty clear with both of our explanations?
Yeah, that's helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
It was basically a way we were trying to envision of getting more commissioners more active and not having everything fall on the shoulders of the chair and vice chair, then reporting back to the other members of the commission once a month. We want to try to be more proactive and less just rubber stamp or responsive. So any further questions, or can we pencil you guys in? We've got Will on gentrification, and Pamela, would you like to take lead on Refugees and New Americans?
Sorry. I'm not quite ready to commit. I think I need a little more time to just understand how the commission works, and maybe to think about what issues make sense. So I'm on the fence a little bit, but yeah.
Understood.
Would
Well-
you like me to add you to the invite for the meeting? Just so I will be.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be helpful. And just also, I mean, my other kind of hesitancy is just barely started a new job. So just don't want to overload myself quite yet. So just not sure what that's going to look like. So yeah.
Understood.
But I'm happy to attend the meeting at this point in time, but not commit to leading it at this moment.
All right, so it sounds good. I mean, it's right now we don't have a leader since the resignation of the previous subcommittee chair. So it'll sort of just be ad hoc, I think. It'd be beneficial to have your expertise, though, to be able to advise just as a member of the subcommittee.
Sure. Happy to do it.
Sounds good. Then, unless there's anything else on the subcommittee topic, we can move on to the last thing that we have on the agenda. We discussion or dialogue about human rights. Essentially, this is just since we only meet once a month and there's things happening all the time, if there's any particular topic, local, national, around the world that you want to discuss, this is a good time to do it. For example, saw last month in Israel, the attempt to push through a bunch of revisions to their judiciary was being characterized as undermining the democratic institutions in Israel. Activists and people took to the streets in Israel in massive numbers. We had presentations from, following our presentation from last month, I was looking at it, and it's somewhere between 10 and 15% of the Israeli population turned out into the streets to protest against the moves by the far right-wing coalition government that Netanyahu is heading up. So that's really impressive civic activism that up to 15% of the population of the country turned out to protest against an attempt to undermine the judiciary in their country. So anyway, that's one topic that I took note of. And does anybody have anything else they wanted to bring to anybody's attention that they might have noticed in their realms? Not seeing anything. We have in Central Africa, I think Mali, Burkina Faso, Sub-Saharan Africa, there has been a resurgence in human rights violations based on religion. There's a lot of ethnic and religious minorities are being murdered, specifically in Burkina Faso by what's suspected to be the military are killing Muslim minority populations suspected of being part of what do you call it, kind of Al-Qaeda in Africa affiliated groups. It's down to children and early teenagers are being suspected of helping the militant Islamists. So the military is just riding roughshod over them. There's a lot of attention is being paid to it because European countries and the United States have donated a lot of military hardware, equipment, and supplies to the military in Burkina Faso, giving them training and things like that. And now those resources are being turned to against ethnic and religious minorities. So it's a big problem that our State Department is trying to get a handle on with our bilateral relations with some of the sub-Saharan African countries. So anyway, something that's kind of obscure enough that it may not be on everybody's radar, but American donated resources are being used badly. We're a little bit past time, so unless somebody has any last thoughts or remarks, I can entertain a motion to end the meeting.
I'll second the motion.
All right. All right, all in favor? All right. It looks like it's unanimous. Well, then I guess we will see everybody next month. Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank
Nice
you,
to meet
everyone.
you.
See everyone.
Welcome
Bye-bye.
again. You're